Have you ever stood at the edge of a porch, watching a car disappear down the driveway, wondering if they'd come back? I have. I was 8. My parents didn't say goodbye. They just drove away. But the part that hurt the most wasn't that they left. It was that they came back, only to take what my grandmother left me. Not love, not a memory, but a trust fund, meant for my future. They drained it. Every penny, for my sister's wedding. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just the girl my grandmother raised, with tea rituals and grocery envelopes. She taught me how to read bank statements before I learned algebra. By the end of this story, you'll learn how I stood up to them at 18, how I turned betrayal into a scholarship fund, and how I finally understood forgiveness doesn't mean reunion. Sometimes it just means peace. They used the money for flowers, cake, and champagne. I used the truth. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, don't scroll. This isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming what was always yours. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. That way I can send you a special shout out. Now, let's begin our story together. They said they'd come back. They didn't say when, and they didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry when the car pulled away. I just stood there, one hand gripping the handle of my small pink suitcase, the other wrapped around the edge of Grandma June's porch post. The screen door creaked softly behind me, and the scent of lavender drifted from the bushes that lined the porch steps. I kept my eyes fixed on the end of the driveway, long after the car had disappeared. I remember thinking, if I stood still enough, quiet enough, maybe they'd change their minds. Maybe the car would reverse. Maybe Mom would wave from the window. Maybe Dad would at least look back. But the gravel had settled, and the silence didn't shift. "Come on in, sweet pea," Grandma June said behind me. Her voice was warm, like the knitted shawl she wore even in summer. I didn't move, not until she gently touched my shoulder and added, "You don't have to pretend you're okay." That was the first time someone ever said something like that to me. The inside of her house smelled like Earl Grey and cinnamon. I could hear the kettle clicking from the stove as she moved through the kitchen in soft slippers, the kind with bunny ears stitched onto the toes. She offered me a pair too, and I remember hesitating. My parents didn't wear slippers. They wore shoes in the house, always ready to leave, but I took them. They were fluffy and a little too big. They didn't match my dress, but they were warm. She set a plate of peach cobbler on the table, a generous scoop steaming next to a dollop of whipped cream. "Made it this morning," she said, sitting across from me. "Peaches are in season. They taste best when you're a little sad." I didn't say much. I just nodded and took a bite. The sweetness surprised me. We didn't talk about why I was there. Mom had said, "It's just for a little while." Dad had said nothing at all. And me, I'd promised to be good. I'd even packed my homework, my books, and my church shoes, just in case. That night, the guest room felt too quiet. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and there were hand-stitched quilts folded neatly on the bed. But I kept the light on. I sat at the window, knees pulled up to my chest, waiting. The street lamp outside flickered gently, casting a warm glow over the front yard. I watched every pair of headlights that passed. None of them turned into the driveway. Downstairs, I could hear the clink of a teacup against a saucer. The radio hummed something old and slow. June moved through the kitchen like she wasn't waiting for anything. She opened a jar of honey, stirred her tea, and hummed a tune I didn't recognize. I tiptoed down the stairs, careful not to let them creak, but she saw me anyway. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked without turning. I nodded from the stairwell. She set out a second cup. "Chamomile," she said. "Won't fix everything, but it helps." I took it in both hands, letting the warmth seep into my palms. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. We sat like that until the clock struck 10. The tea grew cold, but I didn't notice. Eventually, she said, "Sometimes grown-ups make choices they don't understand themselves." That stayed with me. I went back to bed after that, but I didn't fall asleep. I stared at the ceiling, whispering, "I'll be good. I'll be better, I promise." It was a quiet kind of prayer. The next morning, the slippers were still by the bed, so was a neatly folded note in Grandma June's cursive. "First day of a new adventure. Pancakes waiting downstairs. Love, GJ." I smiled without meaning to. She braided my hair before breakfast, humming that same soft tune from the night before. The pancakes were shaped like hearts. She let me pour syrup until it pooled around the edges. "I used to tell your daddy to slow down when he was your age," she said, pouring herself a cup of tea. "He never listened. You're more patient than he was." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded and kept chewing. Outside, the lavender bushes swayed gently. A few bees danced from blossom to blossom. The driveway was still empty, but for the first time, I didn't flinch every time a car passed. Even now, years later, I still hear the sound of that car driving away more clearly than I remember their voices. The way the tires crunched on gravel, the faint thump of the trunk closing, the way the taillights curved around the bend in the road. I held on to that sound like it might mean something if I remembered it well enough. They didn't say goodbye, but maybe they meant something else by leaving me here. Some kids get advice. I got a key and a quiet promise that I wouldn't always need to wait by the window. When I moved in with Grandma June, I didn't know what normal looked like. But over the years, her way of loving taught me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't decorated in grand gestures or big words. It was slippers by the door, grocery lists written in pencil, and folded laundry that smelled like lavender and starch. By the time I turned 9, I was already organizing her spice cabinet alphabetically. By 10, I was helping her balance the checkbook every Sunday evening. It wasn't a chore. It was like being trusted with something sacred. June believed in structure, not control, but rhythm. We had chicken pot pie every Thursday, library runs every second Saturday, and tea every evening, always from the same chipped floral cups. My favorite had a small crack on the handle, like a secret only I knew. At school, I kept mostly to myself. I wasn't the kid who volunteered to read out loud or raised her hand first, but I had sharp eyes and a good memory. Miss Hale, my science teacher, noticed it early on. "You think in patterns," she told me once. "Biology will love you." She was right. I did well in class. Better when I got to observe things, plants growing under different lights, ant trails through sugar mazes. I liked answers that didn't come from guessing. At 12, I started helping in the school library. Mr. Dunbar, the old librarian with a permanent coffee stain on his tie, taught me how to re-shelve by the Dewey Decimal System. I memorized it within a month. The quiet there reminded me of June's house, soft, safe, and filled with the weight of stories that mattered. At home, June turned envelopes into education. She taught me how to split a $20 bill into 4 parts: groceries, savings, giving, and just because. I liked the way money had order when she explained it. It wasn't scary. It wasn't a secret, she made sure of that. The year I turned 14, she took me to the district science fair. I'd built a basic water filtration system using layers of gravel and sand. I came in second. She cried, quietly, but fully. She pressed her hand to my cheek and said, "You're going to change things, Natalie, not just fix them, change them." That night, she gave me a gift wrapped in old newspaper. Inside was a velvet box, and inside that, a gold necklace. Tiny, thin, and simple. A small key hung from the chain, delicate and unmarked. "You'll know when to use it," she said. I remember staring at it, then back at her. "Is it for a real lock?" I asked. "Not the kind you're thinking of." June didn't elaborate. She never explained her mysteries all at once. That was her way. But I wore it every day from then on. I still do. Through those years, her hair grew whiter, her walk slower. But she never missed a tea hour, never forgot my birthdays, never let a single light bulb in the house go burn out without replacing it the same day. She held our little world together with a kind of gentle gravity. But near the end of 2021, things started slipping. It began with small things. Burnt toast, missing her steps on the porch, forgetting where she put the grocery list. I caught her once sitting at the foot of the stairs, rubbing her knees like they'd betrayed her. When I asked if she was okay, she just smiled and said, "Getting older is a tricky arrangement, sweetheart." The week before Christmas, I noticed her hands trembling as she poured the tea. She nearly dropped the kettle. I rushed to steady her and she laughed it off, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "I'm just tired," she said. "Happens to the best of us." But I knew. On New Year's Day, it happened. She was making tea, of course she was, and I heard the crash from upstairs. A thud, the sound of porcelain shattering, and then silence. I sprinted down, heart hammering, calling her name. She was crumpled near the stove, steam still curling from the spout above her. Her breathing was shallow, one hand clutching the edge of the counter like she'd tried to hold on. "Grandma!" My voice broke. I fumbled for my phone, dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The operator asked me questions I could barely process. I kept repeating the address like a chant, like saying it right would make help arrive faster. The ambulance came within minutes, but it felt like a year. I rode in the front seat, arms crossed tightly, the necklace tucked under my shirt, the key pressing against my skin like it knew something I didn't. At the hospital, they made me wait. Too young for the ER floor, too old to feel helpless. I paced. I pulled the necklace out, ran my thumb over the key's ridges. My legs ached, but I didn't sit down. Then a nurse stepped out. Her scrubs were navy blue. Her face was calm, but unreadable. "Are you Natalie Brooks?" I nodded, the sound of my name suddenly foreign. "You should come with me." My parents showed up at the funeral in matching black, but none of their grief fit right. Diane wore a stiff hat she never would have worn for June in life. Greg held an umbrella like it was an accessory, not protection. And Rachel wore her rehearsal dinner dress. Ivory silk, backless, the kind of thing that whispered celebration louder than mourning. I stood at the front of the chapel, my hands folded, my eyes dry. Not because I wasn't mourning, God I was, but because the tears had already come, quiet and private, in the hallway outside June's ICU room 3 days ago. This was something else. This was performance, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of watching me break. The chapel was small, just like June would have wanted. A low ceiling, soft pews, faint rain tapping the stained glass windows. Most of the neighbors showed up. Miss Hale came, so did Mr. Dunbar. They brought casseroles and polite smiles and hugged me like I was made of something soft. My parents sat in the second row, not the front, never the front. Greg nodded at me once. Diane dabbed her eyes with a tissue that never got wet. After the service, we returned to June's house. Her house. The one that smelled like cinnamon and steeped tea, now masked by perfume and casseroles gone cold. I stayed in the kitchen, slicing through a dry carrot cake someone had brought in a rush. Rachel was laughing in the living room, actually laughing, her voice high and bright. I could hear her say something about seating charts and peonies. I was halfway through stacking plates when someone cleared her throat behind me. "Natalie Brooks?" I turned. A woman in her early 30s stood there, clean-cut blazer, calm eyes. She looked both out of place and like she knew exactly what she was doing. "Yes? I'm Alicia Porter. I handled your grandmother's legal affairs. Do you have a moment?" She didn't wait for my answer. She stepped back, letting me follow her out onto the porch. The air was damp but clearer than inside. I wrapped my arms around myself. "I know this isn't the best time," she began, "but there's something you need to see. About your trust." "My trust?" I blinked. She nodded. "June set aside a restricted account for you, $50,000. It was earmarked for education or housing. Nothing else. She was specific." My breath caught. She never told me. She intended to. Her lawyer had instructions to release the information when you turned 18, but... She trailed off. I didn't ask her to finish. "She updated the paperwork in early 2022, Alicia continued. "But here's the thing, Natalie, it's gone." I stared at her. "The funds?" I asked. "Yes," she said quietly. "Withdrawn over 2 months ago. June authorized it. but the transfers went directly to your parents, Diane and Greg Brooks. Something sank in my chest. That doesn't make sense. Alicia held out a thin folder. The bank statements are in here. Breakdown of transactions. June to your parents, then to third parties. I flipped it open. June 3rd, $20,000 to Diane Brooks. June 10th, $15,000 to Greg Brooks. June 21st, $15,000 split between Floral and Vine Wedding Co. and the Grand Oak Pavilion. I couldn't speak. I did some digging, Alicia said softly. Your sister got married this past summer, right? I nodded, my lips numb. These match venue and vendor payments for a wedding held on June 25th. I wasn't invited, I murmured. I know. My phone buzzed. Rachel. A text. A photo. She stood under a floral arch beaming in lace. The caption, "Couldn't have had the dream wedding without you." I didn't remember pressing delete, but I must have. The screen went black again and I just stood there. It wasn't just the money, it was the audacity. They took it, I said. They really took it. Alicia nodded. They did, and it wasn't theirs to take. A pause. She reached into her bag again and handed me a sealed envelope. Cream-colored, addressed in June's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it. The loops of her letters so familiar, it hurt. Alicia spoke gently. She left this for you, told me to give it only after I explained the trust. I broke the seal slowly like it might bleed. Inside, a single sheet. If they're back, it's not for you, it's for what they think you have. Her voice rang in my head, not cruel, just clear. She knew, she had always known. The ache in my throat sharpened, but I didn't cry. Not now, not for them. When I looked up, Alicia was watching me. "We have options," she said, "legal ones. But the first decision, whether to stay silent or speak up, is yours." And in that moment, with June's words still echoing and Rachel's message still stinging, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was betrayal, and the kind that didn't fade with time. They didn't ask if I was okay. They asked if I still had access to the account. The wind had a sharpness that morning, the kind that made your coat feel thinner than it was. Leaves scuttled across the sidewalk like they were in a hurry to be anywhere else. I clutched the folder Alicia had mailed me last week, the one with financial documents I hadn't wanted to read. I hadn't opened it. Not fully. Just enough to see the names. Just enough to feel sick. Her office was tucked above a quiet cafe on Elm Street, the kind of building that tried to disguise serious business with warm lighting and the smell of scones. I pushed open the door and was met by soft jazz and the faint scent of Earl Grey. June's tea. Alicia stood when I entered, offering me a small smile. "I'm glad you came," she said, gesturing to the seat across from her desk. I sat down slowly, careful to place the folder flat on her desk. "I read part of it," I said, "just not the rest." "That's okay," she replied. "You've had a lot to hold already." The room was warm, too warm, a little too much like home, except this wasn't a place of comfort. It was a place of decision. "I need to know what happens if I do this," I said. "If I don't just let it go." Alicia leaned back in her chair and opened her own folder, filled with pages I recognized by layout if not by detail. "Here's what we've confirmed," she said. "The trust was restricted. It was meant for you, your education, housing, future assets. It wasn't to be touched without your consent." I nodded. I'd read that part. It was spelled out clearly in June's handwriting, which Alicia had scanned and annotated. "For Natalie, do not move without her signature." "But the signatures," I said, already knowing. Alicia tilted the paper toward me. "They forged yours. The bank accepted it. The withdrawals match the florist, caterer, and venue invoices for Rachel's wedding. And now," I whispered, "they want to know if I still have access." "Diane called the bank last week," Alicia confirmed. "She asked if the remainder of the trust could be transferred. They told her only the beneficiary could authorize it. That's you." I stared down at my lap. My fingers had gone cold, even in the warmth of the office. I could still hear June's voice from a summer 3 years ago. We'd been in the kitchen organizing her tin boxes labeled utilities, groceries, and emergencies. She'd handed me a fresh envelope that day, blank but crisp. "This one," she'd said, "is for what no one else gets to touch. Every person needs one like that, a place where your yes means yes and your no means no." I didn't understand what she meant back then. Now I did. Alicia pushed a sheet toward me. "You have 3 options." I didn't look at it. She continued gently. "First, you can let it go. No action. They'll keep the money and it ends here. Second, you can seek private settlement. Try to negotiate repayment quietly. Third, we can file a civil suit." "And they'll be served?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Yes." I closed my eyes for a moment. In the dark, I saw Rachel's wedding photos again, the ones she'd posted the night of the funeral. Her caption had read, "Dreams do come true," with no mention of how those dreams were funded. "She doesn't even realize," I muttered. "She probably thinks it was just a gift." "Even if she does," Alicia said softly, "that doesn't make it right." I opened my eyes and took a long breath. "What if I don't want to be the person who sues her parents?" "You're not suing them because of who they are," she said. "You're doing it because of what they did." The room fell silent. Outside, a family walked by the window, 2 children in puffy coats dragging a red wagon behind them. Laughter echoed faintly. Thanksgiving was 2 days away. People were gathering, except me. I hadn't received an invitation, not even a message, just the text from Rachel a week ago. The photos came out so perfect. "Thanks again." Like none of this was real. I looked down at my tea, Earl Grey, just like June made it. Alicia had offered it when I came in. I hadn't touched it. My fingers drifted toward it now, not to drink, but to feel its warmth. "What if I lose?" I asked. "You won't," she said. "We have everything." "But it won't bring the money back," I added. "Not right away." "No," she agreed. "But it will put a line in the sand. It will tell them you're not a child anymore, and that you remember what was promised." I nodded slowly, then reached for the pen she had placed near the file. My hand trembled just slightly. "I'm not doing this out of revenge," I said aloud, mostly to myself. "I'm doing this because June trusted me. She trusted me to protect what she gave." I signed. Alicia took the papers gently and slid them into a fresh folder. "They'll receive this by Monday," she said. I rose from the chair, the gold key around my neck falling against my chest with a soft clink. Its weight didn't feel symbolic anymore. It felt earned. At the door, Alicia paused. "One more thing," she said, reaching behind her. "These were in June's desk." She handed me a small bundle of recipe cards. June's handwriting, faded ink and flour-dusted edges. "She kept them near the envelopes," Alicia added. "Thought you might want them." I did. I held them to my chest for a second before slipping them into my bag. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The streets had thinned. Lights in dining rooms blinked on like little golden reminders that people were gathering, that families were preparing plates and prayers. I walked past one window where a family clinked glasses. A little girl leaned into her father's arm. A woman pulled sweet potato casserole from the oven. None of them saw me standing there, and I didn't stay long. Because some families gather out of love, some gather out of habit, and some, like mine, only gather when there's something to take. They walked in wearing grief like pressed shirts, neat, practiced, ready for judgment. My parents. Diane's cream blouse was crisp. The pearl pin on its collar gleamed under the harsh courthouse light, as if it could catch truth itself. Greg's navy suit hung too perfectly on his shoulders, like he'd borrowed it for the day. They looked like parents, professionally sad, expertly concerned. But beneath that surface, they were something else entirely. The mediation room at the Chapel Hill Courthouse was small and unadorned, with walls painted a sterile beige and a low ceiling that pressed down like a lid. The worn green carpet muffled each footstep. In the center, a flimsy folding table sat on metal legs. On it rested a pitcher of water sweating into a puddle and a few plastic cups waiting untouched. The window behind me admitted pale winter sunlight that sliced through the bare branches of an oak tree. just enough light to show every flaw. I sat beside Alicia Porter. She looked calm and collected, her posture straight as though she'd promised herself to remain unshakable. Across from us, Diane held a tissue so tightly her knuckles turned white. Greg sat with his thumbs hooked in his belt loops, eyes fixed on the table, chin tucked. Both forced themselves to look like hurt people seeking justice, but their expressions were masks, too perfect to be real. Greg spoke first. "We're here to resolve this like a family." His voice was clipped, rehearsed, as if he'd practiced it in a mirror. I didn't speak. Alicia didn't speak. Silence settled over us like a heavy blanket, waiting to smother the truth. Diane exhaled, her voice trembling slightly. "Natalie, we were shocked by the accusations. It was never our intent to hurt you. We thought it was a shared family understanding. What's ours is yours, and what's yours? Well, it's family, right?" I glanced at her, my gaze unwavering. Her shoulders tightened and her lips pressed together, but she didn't look away. In that moment, I saw the smallest flicker of guilt in her eyes, a shadow beneath carefully applied makeup. Alicia cleared her throat softly. "Let's be precise. The account in question was a restricted inheritance set up by your grandmother, June Carter, for your education or housing. We have original documents, signature logs, and withdrawal records. We also have vendor invoices that match the dates of Rachel's wedding." A thick manila folder slid across the table toward me, obstructing Diane's view for a moment. My name in bold black print stared back. I ran a fingertip over the worn edge. My heart pounded beneath my ribs. The gold key around my neck glinted in the corner of my vision, a reminder of something steadier than the shaky world before me. Greg leaned forward, a defensive half-smile curling at his lips. "We needed to help Rachel get started. It was one weekend. A wedding isn't cheap, and family helps each other." Alicia didn't flinch. "A large portion of the funds, over $20,000, paid for accommodations at the Grove Park Inn, including spa services. That was a 4-day event. Additionally, the florist invoice matches the vendor name in June Carter's trust, Floral and Vine Co. Every expense was drawn from that account." Diane's face drained of color. She fumbled with her tissue, pressing it against her lips. I didn't realize how specific it was. I pressed my fingertips to the key, letting its cool weight ground me. June's voice echoed in my head. "Loyalty means nothing if it's only expected one way." That afternoon in her kitchen when she handed me the necklace had seemed like a small moment then. Now it felt like a promise I was learning to keep, more powerful than any contract. The mediator, a woman named Sharon, spoke for the first time, her voice calm and precise. "The goal here is to resolve this without further litigation. Natalie, would you like to say anything?" I raised my chin. "Yes." My voice came out firmer than I expected. "You raised me better than this." I looked at Diane. "No, you didn't raise me. June raised me." The table went silent. Greg's expression flickered from annoyance to shock. Diane's hand trembled as the tissue fell from her grasp. Then Greg slammed his palm onto the table so hard the pitcher trembled, and water splashed the edge. "It was just money!" he roared, his voice echoing off the bare walls and rattling the papers in front of him. I didn't flinch. I touched the key around my neck, feeling its cool metal settle against my skin. June's absence felt like her hand on my back, steadying me without a word. "Then why did you steal it?" I asked, my voice calm but unrelenting. "Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless." A hush fell. The only sounds were the slow hum of overhead fluorescent lights, the distant click of a copier down the hall, and the abrupt thrum of my heartbeat. Diane's lips quivered. Greg looked away, jaw clenched. My gaze swept the table, pausing on the empty chair at the far end, the seat Rachel would have taken if she cared. Her absence stung as much as my parents' betrayal. Alicia cleared her throat softly. "Ms. Brooks, Sharon and I wish to know, are you ready to settle today, or do you prefer to pursue litigation? Sharon gave a slight nod. The choice is yours, Natalie. I took a breath. Memories of June's garden unfolding behind my eyelids, lavender petals brushing my fingers, bees humming in the morning sun. I rose from my seat, the weight on my chest lifting slightly. No, I said firmly. I will not be silenced. I turned and walked away, every step echoing on the cold courthouse floor. Outside, the winter light felt sharper against my face, but inside me, something warmed, a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. The room where truth wins doesn't need a judge's gavel. Sometimes it's just a folding table, 4 metal chairs, and a girl deciding that loyalty born of love can't be taken for granted. Sharon's expression remained neutral, but I saw the slightest tension around her pursed lips. It reminded me of June's steady presence, like Grandma would have sat in that seat right beside me, cheering me on with that gentle confidence she always carried. I took a slow breath, feeling the key's metal warmth return. The next step, whatever it was, felt clear now because I understood that truth doesn't need a courtroom to exist. It just needs courage. I used to believe closure looked like an apology, a carefully chosen phrase, a moment of mutual understanding. But now it looks like a garden in full bloom and no longer glancing toward the driveway. Spring came late that year. The cherry tree in the front yard had more stubbornness than grace, its blossoms hesitant in the breeze. But the lavender bloomed early, almost defiantly. It spilled over the walkway June had once swept in gentle circles every Saturday morning. I swept it now, not because I had to, but because I liked the way the bristles dragged along the stone. It reminded me the house was still mine. Or perhaps, finally, mine. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and lemon rind, though I hadn't baked in days. June's apron still hung on the back of the pantry door, and I couldn't bring myself to move it. Some things I'd kept the same. The yellow curtains, her watering schedule taped above the sink. But I'd painted the reading nook, framed my high school science fair photo, the one where June had stood beside me, her hand resting just lightly on my shoulder. That hand had steadied so much more than my nerves. Alicia stopped by that morning, her visit brief but final. She placed the check on the counter, thinner than I expected, but heavy in its meaning. "It's done," she said gently. "You're free to move on, however you define that." I nodded. I hadn't decided whether I'd ever cash it. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't be spending it on proving points. Instead, I opened a new folder in June's filing cabinet, typed up a mission statement, called the library, the guidance office, even Miss Hale, my old science teacher. By the end of the week, the June Carter Memorial Scholarship had a logo, a checking account, and a purpose. Some of us grow up with people who didn't have to love us, but chose to anyway. I wanted that choice to ripple outward. $1,000 for a college-bound teen raised by a grandparent, a quiet nod to those stories that never make the headlines but shape the strongest hearts. The library smelled the same as it always had: paper, possibility, and the faintest trace of dust. I stood at the podium in the small conference room with mismatched chairs. Half the crowd were strangers. The other half were high schoolers, leaning more toward their phones than my speech. But I spoke anyway. "I'm here because someone chose me when others walked away," I said. "This isn't about what I lost. It's about who I became." Later that night, I returned home and reached for the drawer I'd avoided for nearly a year. June's desk still creaked the same way. The gold key around my neck fit perfectly. Inside, only a photo and a sticky note. We were in the garden, dirt on our jeans, sunlight in our squinting eyes. And beneath her looping script, just 7 words: "You were the best decision I ever made." I sat there for a long time, longer than I meant to, not crying, not smiling, just still, at peace. Outside, the driveway was empty, no headlights, no fading engines. But for the first time, I didn't wait. They walked away from me once. I walked toward something better. I don't stand by the window anymore. I tend the garden, I write checks to teens with stories like mine, and I keep the photo of us, June and me, where I can see it every morning. Sometimes family isn't about who shares your name, but who shows up when no one else does. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it simply means choosing peace over pain. And in this life, being loved well, even once, can teach you how to love yourself. If this story reminded you of someone who chose you when they didn't have to, I'd love to hear about them. Leave a comment or just take a moment to remember them today. And if this story touched your heart, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about resilience and hope. Thanks for watching.